You know what is an interesting point of irony? How since Raigeki has been released to limited status, the name of Pot of the Forbidden has become a bit of a misnomer. While Pot of Greed, Giant Trinade, and the Forceful Sentry are unlikely to come off the ban list, Raigeki is now at an appropriate power level for the advanced format, and is not even an automatic staple at that. Pot of the Forbidden is the most recent member of the Jar series, which has a long history punctuated by brushes with the ban list. And I think now is a good time to weigh in on the power level of each member, because they really span the gamut from useless to broken, to potentially game warping, with some jars having aged like wine, while others not so much. Starting with the normal monster, Ancient Jar, as a baseline, this is appropriately the oldest member of the series, and has a bad stat line, even for a level 1 monster. But at least the artwork is nice. Dimension Jar is one which needs a bit of context to properly determine its power level on release. This card is quite old, coming out originally in Magician's Force, so well before the graveyard was a useful resource, and when removed from play cards were difficult to recur. This card hits more targets than Disappear, but is limited to monsters, and the effect is symmetric, a theme which carries over to most of the other members of the series. COBRA Jar is the first card I think has a glimmer of potential, since it is a token generator. The 500 burn damage when destroyed as a result of battle should be ignored though, because the real potential of the card is having 2 monsters on the field, which could make for an easy Link 2 monster. It is important to note that the token has no restrictions and can be tributed for a tribute summon, which is uncommon for the era in which it was released. AROMA Jar is quite new by comparison, so it is a little odd to see it so low in the power rankings. This card has conditional battle protection and continuous life gain, which are underwhelming effects outside of 2 very niche situations. The first is in limited or draft formats in which the lack of monster removal makes this a difficult card to get over, and the second in competitive events, where the life point gain can clinch a game due to end of match procedures. Even in the Aroma archetype, the card is not great. Absorbing Jar looks like an inversion of Cyber Jar, offering a heavy storm effect, but compensating the players with card draw. This is an example where an archetype brings new life to an otherwise underwhelming card, namely how the artifact monsters, which are set in the spell and trap zones, benefit from being destroyed during the opponent's turn, offering card advantage and disruption opportunities. Outside of that deck though, the card is not great, and making sure it goes off during the opponent's turn while not being destroyed by a card effect is tricky. Dice Jar is a wild card, and has a variable power level. When this card inflicts 6,000 damage to the opponent, it is the most efficient burn card in the game, but it could backfire catastrophically. This is a situation in which I think the card is poorly designed, because it does not lead to a satisfying game experience, as it is not fun to lose to this card. Self-destruct button is banned, and I think the Dice Jar could be banned for the same reason. Pot of the Forbidden would be placed here in the list according to its power level, as all 4 effects are still very strong, and it can be cheated out with Koinorma, although it still suffers from the flip effect vulnerability to destruction. Beyond this point, every member of the Jar series has been banned at least once, some continuing to stay banned for quite some time. Morphing Jar number 2 is a strong board disruption tool, but it is also a strong mill tool, being able to potentially mill a dozen cards at a time, and special summoning the level 4 or lower monsters face down, which can enable other flip effect monsters, as well as offer further disruption alongside mass removal options such as Raigeki. If the Jar series were meant to be run together in a deck, this card would be the key enabler. Being able to recycle itself is another red flag, but the flip effect nature of the card means it still has limited initiative. Cyber Jar is another disruption tool, offering a board wipe then hand refill, which is extremely beneficial on a burn deck, as it can not only buy a turn, but also refill the hand with more burn spells and traps. The fact that this card can draw both players 5 cards makes it a couple steps down from the manga and anime Card of Sanctity effect, which offers unparalleled acceleration. Morphing Jar comes off the ban list every now and then, and might be weird to see it above Cyber Jar, but the Morphing Jar ceiling is higher in my opinion. While both monsters can dig 5 cards deeper into the deck, Cyberjar self-destructs, which prevents loops, while Morphing Jar is the centerpiece and Empty Jar mill decks, in which Morphing Jar is flipped face up and face down repeatedly, functioning as the deck's win condition. Cyberjar and Morphing Jar are easily in the same tier of power level, and I understand if their rank were swapped according to taste. And then there is Fiberjar, which is broken and poorly designed. And I don't mean that to be redundant. Drawing 5 cards has already proven to be powerful, as displayed by Cyber and Morphing Jar. Additionally, this card is an incredible disruption tool, like Cyberjar and Morphing Jar number 2. But even that is not enough to be deemed poorly designed in my opinion. Dice Jar trivializes the game by eliminating strategy due to its random outcome and high ceiling. And Fiberjar has the same impact. Resetting the game, save for the Banish Zone, Fiberjar can trivialize your opponent's first turn, giving you a fresh start with the ability to attack. If you can OTK without the normal summon, this card removes all on-field deterrents. And since Fiberjar recycles itself, you can potentially reset the game multiple times until you find yourself in a favorable position. Scheherazade might be the worst designed card in Magic because it forces the players to play a sub-game that only has a minor effect on the main game. But Fiberjar is not far behind. Scheherazade is on the extremely short list of black bordered cards which are banned in all formats, and I think that Fiberjar is the only jar that should never leave the ban list. Although Cyberjar could maybe come off the list.